Today, I'm really happy to close the semester with the artist Charley Friedman. Charley and his wife Nancy, who is also here, and their dog Yoshi, are instrumental artists in Lincoln, Nebraska, and also Omaha. They are widely known in our circles in the state. They migrated from New York, where they also have a very strong community there. And the both of them run Fiendish Plots, which is a small project space in Lincoln. It's a gallery space where they invite artists from New York to come for a week, install the show, do lectures and talks with the community in a way to build culture in the state of Nebraska. They are a dynamic duo, to say the least, okay? And Charley, especially this year, has had a fantastic run at the Bemis. He will talk a little bit about his exhibition where he created a series of guitars that were played by random generator text and compositions. I think this was more than a year in working. Countless people you enlisted for help and part of your group. So Charley is just a really important artist here, and so we're really happy to have him here speaking. One more thing I need to say. Charley's contribution to this show is called the Holocaust Deniers Word Search. And I saw that puzzle that he made maybe a couple years ago in his studio, and I was really intrigued with it, and I was looking for an opportunity to use it in a show. And since we did this show on drawing, the whole point of the show of drawing is to expand the definition of what it means. That's the whole point. And I thought to include his work in the show would be one gesture that does that. So please join me in welcoming Charley Friedman. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks Concordia for inviting me. So my name is Charley Friedman, as the sign indicates up here. So I spend, a little bit of a background, I spend some of my time here, which is in New York City. I spend time there with my wife and with Yoshi, and we hang out. We spent a great many years there, about 20 years. So I spend my life there, which is an urban center. It's surrounded by water. We eat pastrami and corned beef and the best pickles on the planet. And then much of New York is about people. And so much of your life is underground. It's in the subways. You get the smells of people, you get the urbanness, you're up against people. So all that kind of socialization lingers there. And then you also get great public art. This is a Solowit, by the way, in the subway system. If you don't know Solowit, you can write that down. So I spend time there, urban center, on the edge of this continent, and then here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where the horizon line is right there. Now, both places, New York has lots of people, and of course the Prairie doesn't have many people, but both New York and the Prairie are conditioned by the human element, okay? So this right now is a human creation, essentially, because it's farmland. And then in Lincoln, unlike New York might have the biggest buildings in the world, but Lincoln, Nebraska, has the biggest phallus in the world. So I'm surrounded by this thing, and since much of my work has to do with signs and symbols, it's always a pleasure to see this every day. Performance is a big part of my work. So this is my father, and this is my mother. I use everything around me to create my artwork, and for me, performance is the key to engage with people. Much of my work starts here, in drawing, in sketchbooks. Since the early 80s, I've been using drawing, sketching in my sketchbooks as my first line of defense. It's my most important vehicle, my most important tool, and absolutely almost no one ever gets to see them because it's for me. And a little guide because you're students. When I make a sketchbook, the first thing I do is I date it, I put about a paragraph about what's going on in my life, and then I put whatever I'm thinking about, and that's what I do. Here's an image of Holocaust Deniers Word Search as I was making it. This is the first piece I'm going to show you. It's a box hanging from the ceiling. Now, much of my work has to do with signs, it has to do with symbols, it has to do with our perception of information. So in this piece, this box is hanging from the ceiling. You stick your head into it, and when you're sticking your head into it, you get one perception, and that is of me. Okay? This piece is psychological. Okay? It's about how you receive information through your emotions, through smells, through the perception from the outside, and through the perception of the inside. So when you stick your head into it, it's 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside environment, and I'm in there, and I'm on my knees and my hands, and I'm eating this cake. Okay? And if you decide to take some cake, I motion to you, and then you can take some cake. And then it becomes this piece. It's a piece about intimacy, and it's a piece about power. And it's a piece about the human experience, the human engagement. This piece is called 1 Hour Smile. I did it in 1995. And I wanted a life piece. And what I do is I smile for exactly 1 whole hour, 1 take, head to toe. This is a video of it. This is about halfway through it. And you can see how it documents the deterioration of my face. This piece is about socialization. It's about emotional states. It's about how we as human beings can smile. We know what a smile is, but it doesn't mean that we're happy. Okay? It's also thinking about time as material and the self as a performative material. It's also thinking about age as material. So I decided this piece would become a life piece. So every 10 years, I redo this piece. So here you can see it in 1995, 2005, and 2015. Okay? So time stretches. Time stretches. When does the piece end? It ends at when I die. So I actually do not know how many pieces of this, how many versions of this I will make. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be as much as 8. Here are some different performative characters I have. Up here we have the adenoid, we have myself, which I consider a performative character, Charley Friedman over there, which is me as a Hasidic Jew, the Talisman, and Betsy Geffen. And I'll show you some pieces about that. So there's no chronological order to my work. I consider it one gigantic, group exhibition. One of the themes, though, that goes through my work is the holy, is the sacred, and the secular. And much of my work does come down to this, is what becomes authentic? What is authentic? What is original? And what is unique? And that could be a piece of artwork. It could be a holy or sacred object, like a cross or a document in a church, or it could be something like the Bill of Rights. All of these things in our society are sacred elements, and I just don't see much difference in any of them. So much of my work is figuring out when something becomes holy, when something becomes sacred, when something becomes priceless. In this case, this is me dressed up as a fictitious art dealer named Betsy Geffen. I took my work into Jack Tilton Gallery in the middle of Soho, and I tried to sell it. Here I am with Jack Tilton. By the way, I made my own hips for this piece. And I'm wearing my wife's clothing. Here I am as Charley Friedman. This piece is about sacredness, ritual, stereotype, xenophobia with an ounce of humor in it. Humor is also very important to me because it's one of those humanistic elements. It's the conduit that binds us as humans. And with humor, once you get something to go inside of the body, instead of being this conceptual piece or something that you just have to describe or a bunch of verbiage, it becomes something that you own. So I'm interested in how information enters into the body and it becomes your own. Here I am dressed as Bezalel. I grew out my beard. It took about 4 months. I made my own payas, the curls. And what I did is at the Sheldon Museum, I became a docent. And I gave really good factual tours of the museum. Here I am. at the front door, talking about the mezuzah, the fictitious mezuzah that I saw on the front door. And besides giving a good factual, informative tour, I also decided to, I did it on Friday night when the Jewish Sabbath begins. So at some point, I actually mixed the docent tour with myself as someone who's celebrating the Sabbath. Okay, now we're going to do the Kiddush. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hadafen amen. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishon mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'shabach v'tov yahva'u ratzoni. Okay, now so it was very important for me to have a blending of the ritual and the artifact both together. And I wanted to confuse people. So which was more important? Was the ritual an actual prayer over the Sabbath, or was it a piece of artwork? I'm also really approaching the audience, the people who came to the performance, because at some point during it, I said, well, you know, I took a head count of all the Jews on the planet, and we decided that we're actually all going to move to Lincoln, Nebraska, because frankly, it's not so good for Jews anymore around the planet. Israel's not going so hot. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. So we're all going to move to this temple of art in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we're going to do all of our holidays there. And if everything goes well, we'll buy it. And so people kind of freaked out. Once again, mixing ritualistic object with a piece of artwork. I made my own menorah. This menorah is made out of wax. I made an aluminum mass under it and then melted wax on top of it. Here I'm thinking of time. The things about menorahs are about 2,000 years old, and one of the salient features of it is how time gets used and how wax melts all over the piece. So I'm thinking about if you decide to have this piece in your home, then the wax, when you're lighting the menorah, the wax continues to melt. So in that case, it's kind of a generative process. Whoever takes ownership over this adds it and passes this down. And in that sense, the piece grows, the sculpture grows, and the ritual grows. I think of one of the main materials of this piece, besides being wax, is actually the fire. So you can see how the wax drips well below the plinth. So besides Judaism, I'm also thinking about what it means to have a kind of a prehistoric belief. How do we worship things? How do we think of the otherness? How do we approach awe, and how do we approach wonderment? So here's this little figure in front of this band of yellowness. And this piece is called Looking at the Sun. So here I'm trying to engage this little kind of monstery, childlike figure who's kind of dressed up in some kind of an outfit, or he could even be naked. And he in fact is kind of almost kind of worshiping these bands of the sun, or in fact he could be creating them. I'm thinking about people dancing around a fire. I am deflating it though a little bit with humor so you can see the nice little tushy on his back. And you have to lean across and see the front to kind of see what's going on. So in that way, you as a participant have to engage with it by wedging yourself between the actual little object and the drawing. This piece is a performance called the Talisman. I did this performance in New York City. It's comprised of me in that green outfit. I'm kind of a Muppet man. And I have this Muppet that I created, this puppet, on the end of my hand. And I have a tablecloth, which is kind of akin to how salespeople usually sell things on the streets of New York, like they'll sell fake Prada purses or whatever. So I made some fake talisman. And what I did is people would come by, and they would, and I would say, "Would you like a talisman?" And if people stopped, that's when I approached them. And I'll play you a little bit of this video. So the key to this piece was to have people talk directly to the puppet, to the Muppet. And once you're talking directly to a puppet on the end of my hand, you begin to give up something. Because the plunge between talking to a puppet on the end of someone's hand to then picking up a talisman that you imagine is made for you, it's not that much of a leap, okay? But the key to that is to engage in something that's earnest and honest. People know I'm a puppet. People know it's pretend. But once you give in to that, then you give in to the next level. So when people say, when people go up to me and they say, well, I would like a talisman, how I respond as the talisman, they say, what do you need? And when you say what you need, you actually have to be honest. So people would say, I'm looking for love. I'm looking for health care. And then I choose them out a talisman that's made for them. And that is how a belief system starts. You know, humans are able to imagine things that don't actually exist. So I'm once again interested in how we can infuse objects with something that's bigger than what they actually are. Thinking about things that are holy, or thinking about things where we use our imagination, or we have this belief system that we actually acknowledge that is something that's real. Through text and semiotics, I wanted to abstract really the most complicated idea we have, which is the belief in a higher power. So I made these three inflatable letters, G and an O and a D, and you can see all the mechanics of how they work. So here's the motor. Here's the motor, and you can actually see them turn. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for some transition in your mind. So here you can see the video. So you can see how the letters slowly turn, the G, the O, and the D, and those are three-dimensional, but they also cast a three-dimensional shadow on the wall. Keeping with text, I made a fountain. And the fountain says, I like moist things. And what happens is little drops drip onto these sponge letters like rain, and then those, in turn, slowly drip into the fountain. And what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about how our basic humdrum thoughts actually become part of who we are. They can create an aesthetic, they can create taste, they actually create value in our life, even if we think that they're small. And the rain, the reason why I chose water and the rain, because that is like a mantra. And so it's this combination of having this mantra-like aspect, this meditative-like aspect, up against this really kind of banal, ridiculous statement. But how those things are intimately intertwined. This piece is 4 feet by 8 feet, and it's a little bit difficult to read. But it's made on 2 pieces of plywood, and those are then cut out. And the words that they say, it's all of my basic information. It's my name, it's my address, it's my telephone number, it's my social security number, and my telephone and my email. But I put asterisks where my password was. About 20 years ago, I made this piece, and I saw that we were actually going into a society where our basic information would have a more realistic self-portrait of who we are than a typical self-portrait by a realistic artist like Rembrandt or whatnot. And how this information would tell a realistic portrait of who we are just through letters and numbers. And that really scared me. So this piece I created, and in fact, 20 years later, our favorite social media outlets do in fact make a better portrait of ourselves than we in fact make of ourselves. They know what we like, they know our desires, they know our fantasies, they know what our children like, they know what our pets like. And we actually do not even know how much they know about us. But it's the most realistic self-portrait that we have. This piece scared me so much that it's actually the only piece to this day that I've destroyed. And here you can see a close-up of it. Letters. Letters create language, but letters in and of themselves are really kind of a secret code. So this piece is called the Western Code. And if you know these letters, and if you know the code, you can actually dive into it, and you can dissect it, you can read it. If you live in Persia, you can speak Farsi, and you can use the Arabic code to dig into that language. In the Western world, we have the English letters. So what I did is I made a bunch of drawings based on, I believe there are 39 different handmade drawings. And each letter is brought down to their lowest common denominator. So I'm looking for at what is the lowest, at where do we recognize a symbol? Where do we recognize a letter? So in this case, here is a Q. And a Q is basically a circle with one little pokey thing kind of going down into the gravity on the right side. Here's an amperstamp. Amperstamp are basically two round things with a squiggly thing coming out of it. Here's the letter B, 3, the number 3, and here's the letter B. And each one of these is about this tall. So everything in this project was based on the American keyboard, the US keyboard. Once again, signs and signifiers. This piece is called Nipple Eyes. It's two shaved nipples. And they make eyes. And I'm thinking about that loosely based thing where people think of the eyes are the windows to the soul. So I'm thinking about how you can look at something, you can know that this thing is not real, you know it's not attached to the soul. This piece doesn't even have emotion, but when you look at it, nonetheless you think, those nipples look angry. And by extension, those eyes look angry. So where does that switch off between what we know and what we feel happen? So I'm really playing around with that wiggle room here. And it's kind of funny and irreverent and absurd at the same time. Fall Swastika in Cornish, New Hampshire is a performance piece where the document is a photograph. And I'm thinking about how you can own a symbol and once again deal and own that symbol and then let that symbol poof. How you can own it and then deal with it and let it go away. So I took this swastika, I made a 40-foot swastika, and then I let the wind blow it away. And I'm thinking about how things like xenophobia, anti-Semitism, or bigotry is really skin deep. Okay? On the surface, we might have our values that we believe in, but underneath, right below the surface, they lurk. So I'm thinking about, in a house like this, you might have an image of the lawn, of a way the place looked like in 1910. And it might be between the hallway and the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room, and that's where it might lurk, okay? So I framed it in a nice little frame, but I'm really thinking about how those values we have are just below the surface. Hatred can be just below the surface. What does it mean to have authenticity? This is my character called the Adenoid. This was once again on the streets of New York City. I took some candies by the artist Felix Gonzalez Torres, who's this pretentious conceptual artist that people love to collect. But he essentially, as one of his main materials, are candies. So I took his candies, and on Valentine's Day in 2001, right after 9/11, I sold them. I read love poems. I sold love poems for 75 cents. I sold American flags for 25 cents, plastic flowers for 25 cents, but sold Felix Gonzalez Torres candies for $1.25. And so, of course, I was appropriating these candies for my own purposes. I'll show you just a little bit of this video. And of course, the spaces where nothing happens are just as interesting as when something happens. So a lot of times I just sit there, I do nothing, I smoke my cigar.
You know, I kind of do it when I'm inscribed with passion. Like today. I might do it tomorrow. Passover. I don't know.
So let's see if I can get when someone comes.
My heart, only belongs to all the world. I wait with silent passion for one gesture, one glance from you.
So at some point, the gallery woman who gave me these candies came by and realized I was selling the gallery from her gallery. And she said, well, you can't sell these anymore. And in fact, these aren't really Felix Gonzalez Torres candies anymore. And I'm like, they're not? But they were when they were in the gallery, and now they're not anymore? And I'm having it in this very phlegmy voice. So all of a sudden we got engaged in what is art and what's not art. When does something become art and have great value, and when doesn't it? And you can have the same material, the same object, but a completely different value. Here I am as Betsy Geffen once again. I'm at the Sheldon Museum of Fine Arts in Lincoln, Nebraska. And once again, I'm wearing my wife's clothing, but I'm wearing my own wig. So I was a docent once again at Sheldon. And the purpose of this piece, besides giving a tour of the museum, is but for the anniversary of the Sheldon Museum, Betsy Geffen had acquired two pieces for the gallery. The first piece was a piece by Tino Sehgal. Tino Sehgal is a conceptual artist who's had retrospectives at the Guggenheim. So I made up a fictitious piece by Tino Sehgal, whereas we, the audience, would make airplanes, and we would throw them off the balcony of the Sheldon. And however many paper airplanes we made would be how much the piece was worth. So each airplane was worth $1,000. I encouraged everybody to make as many as they could because Betsy Geffen would be paid on a commission basis. So we made about 80 paper airplanes, and all together we shoved them off the balcony of the Sheldon. When this was done, I had a prepared invoice for the director of the Sheldon, Daniel Veneziano, on his stationery. It was to the Marion Goodman Gallery where Tino Sehgal shows. And I filled in $80,000 and 80. Betsy signed it, Daniel Veneziano signed it, and then I sent it off to the Marion Goodman Gallery as a legitimate invoice. This scared Daniel Veneziano out to no extent, but once again, he went into this because of that thing where he loves art and believes in the artist, just like the gallery guide who gave me the Felix Gonzalez Torres candy. There's a fine edge. After this, we went up to another gallery where I had installed a piece by the Fluxus Italian artist named Gino de Dominicis. Gino actually made giant invisible sculptures. He made cubes. So we, the Sheldon, had purchased a giant invisible cube in the Sheldon for $3 million, but they goofed up and they installed it wrong. So we had to get down and all change it and move it together. And it was a surreal experience. And all I can say is it was something that was akin to a seance, because we all picked this thing up and we all moved it about a foot. And we all went with each other and worked with each other. And it was this belief in the effervescence, this belief in this thing that doesn't exist. And so you can see this running throughout all my work. Things exist to the degree that we all decide that they exist together. So when I'm thinking about how things exist, I'm also thinking about politics. In this case, I'm thinking about geopolitical borders. So this place is called Carpet World. It's a 6-foot hand-latched carpeted globe of the entire planet. And of course, like anything else in our planet, these things, a geopolitical map is based on when this map was made and who has the right amount of power. So borders are made by the people who basically have the most power, in this case, the first world. So I'm thinking about how these arbitrary lines are made by the people who have the power in the first world, and how, as a metaphor for the first world, I've used carpet, because first world places have carpet, like this nice auditorium. At the same time, I'm also thinking about how the people who have the power make these decisions on maps from a macro standpoint. But when you're on the ground living in those places, that's micro-dimensional, and you see it in a completely different way. So the thread is a good way of thinking about that, because one piece of thread in a piece like this could demarcate between villages. It could split a village in half. It could split a city in half. It could split a river in half. So I'm thinking about how power and that demarcation of power and those transitions of power make a huge difference. It's also made to look like a gigantic toy that a child would play with. So once again, in some ways, I'm looking through the eyes of a young child, because what children think, how they see the adult world being organized, is very different, and they don't quite understand it, which makes complete sense to me. Here's a close-up of Central America. So here's the piece that's in the show, Holocaust Deniers Word Search. It's about 5 feet by 5 feet, and it's made of 25,000 letters. And in particular, what I'm thinking about is how we measure truth and how we measure fact, and how you can be 6 inches away from each other, away from something, and not see facts. And over the course of the last 5 years, as I saw our country kind of become polarized, I was very aware that we had very different kind of factual information that was being handed down between us. So I wanted to enter into this through the benign word search game. We all know what a word search is, and we all know how it works, so you don't need any particular manual to get into it. At the same time, I thought of this as kind of a conceptual drawing, because even though you don't physically draw a line around it to find the answers, you mentally draw that around. So you get a mental drawing, a mental gesture of this. So here's a close-up of all the letters. And just in case you don't think that there's anything in here, here's the answer sheet, which is overwhelmingly filled with the answers. So it's filled with the major Nazis, all the concentration camps, and in fact it's filled with the top 10 most kind of vital genocides of the last 200 years, from the Armenian genocide to the Native American genocide in this country. They're all in there. So this piece is called Khasi in the Woods. It's about different degrees of nakedness. So which part of me is naked? Is it the part where I've grown out my beard, or is it my body? Which part? Because I could say to myself, the naked part, where I have no clothing, is in fact the part that is naked. But in fact, that also part of my body also has a mask on it. I can read as white, I can read as male, I can read as European. So there are all these different ways. Is the part of my body that has the hair on it, is that how I see myself inside, my truest self, or is it how people perceive me? So I'm thinking about all those different layers of how we filter identity. I made about 110 squirrels, bronze squirrels. And I love squirrels because besides being cute, they're really able to live, coexist with us humans right below us. And I kind of imagine them having this civilization just right at a low hum below us, you know? And I think of them like they eat our fruits, they kind of take the nuts, and they're one of the few animals that we decide to cohabitate with. And we kind of benignly get angry at them. So besides that, I imagine them having this social structure. And on the other hand, I think of them as proxies for us humans. So depending, it's the only piece I've ever made where depending on where I show it and how I show it, I've altered its formal content. So here, this was part of a big installation out at Art Omai in upstate New York, where I had 70 of these things going off in a kind of a procession to some unmarked location. There's a different kind of hierarchy based on whether you have a flower or a nut or a mushroom. Here they are at Crystal Bridges. This one on the rock I imagine to be kind of the person, the one who has the power, maybe the king or the queen. But they're all doing their different things. Some of them are holding strawberries or flowers. These two are kind of, having some little, talk between the two of them. You're taking all the vegetables from me, give some back, whatever. But these are kind of benign settings. I've also placed them in more kind of caustic scenarios. So here you have a bunch of them going into this, this light-filled door. And the door is made of 39 light bulbs, and one of them is in the center. So it looks like a metaphorical door, a graphic door that you can open up. So what I'm thinking about here is how we as humans also can be coerced, can be manipulated. We like moths go to the bright and shiny object, sometimes without thinking about the ramifications of these things. So I am thinking about nationalism, I am thinking about fascism, and I am thinking about how groups of people can, whether or not it's a leader or a leadership or music or whatnot, and how that can pull us in. And here you can see them all going towards the center, like lemmings. My art are the things in my life. When I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, I brought my family, I brought Nancy, I brought our daughter, and I brought Yoshi, our dog. And we moved to a house in the middle of Lincoln. And I decided that, artists have, a lot of people think that artists just kind of sit around and, sit in coffee shops and smoke cigarettes. But I was trying to say, actually, artists have, we wear lots of different masks. We do lots of different things. And here I'm saying, actually, besides being an artist, I actually have a day job. So here, my day job is renting and selling real estate. So instead of hiding it, I decide to put it on my van that I drive around town. So once again, this is one half a performative object, but it's also an object that I really use in my everyday life. So it's a mixing of art and a real functional object. So I drive around town in this van, and it says Friedman Realty, Commercial, Residential, and Conceptual Art. It's loosely based on American Gothic with the snow shovel. And when I made this piece, it was very difficult to look at. And I wasn't even sure if it was artwork or not. So I put it away for 6 months because it was very raw. And at the end of 6 months, I took it out and I decided it was actually worth making. But I do, once again, love that blending of where does art and real life blend together? And I love it when people stop me and say, well, what is conceptual art? I just wanted to rent a place, A caricature of a real object. This piece is part of a larger body of work I made with Nancy called Panopticon. But I made the guns in particular are part of a piece called Gun Show. And I made about 100 different guns out of carpenter grade plywood, and I cut them out. And some of them look like machine guns, and some of them look like 1950s Lost in Space. Others are fantasy-esque. They're all over the place. Some of them look like bubbles. Some of them look like they could be from lost tribal communities. But they're really about how guns, the icon of the gun, is such a ubiquitous part of the American identity that they're not just about guns anymore. They're about something else. They're about ownership, they're about personality, and they're in every part of our culture. Some of the guns are particularly small because from a very young age, we actually, guns become part of us. We get guns as toys when we're little, and we play with them. So this really is about, you might say it's I'm taking a political stance on it, but it's really more basic. It's about how guns are a part of us, and they're so close to us that they carry our own personalities, and we don't actually see that guns are made to do one thing and one thing only. So within this series, I did do one thing. Every single gun has a handle, every single gun has a trigger, and every single gun has a place for the death object to come out of. And make no mistake, that bullet is meant to do one thing. So here you can see them all set around. This one right here, you can see this one actually is a digestive system up there. So the last body of work I'm going to show you is I'm kind of going to talk about it in different sections. So the piece that Jim was talking about at the Bemis was a big project called Soundtracks for the Present Future. And I needed to create a budget. I needed to actually get the money for this. So I made a Kickstarter. And if you don't know about Kickstarter, it's a crowdsourcing site for anybody who's making something, for creatives. So what I decided is I made I made my budget. And then I made a bunch of different artifacts that were aimed at appealing to different patrons. And I used my different performance personas to engage with the people. So everybody I knew, I created a 15-second video, and then I sent it to them. I would send it through their phones, through their email, and you would just get it. And it was personalized for that person I was sending it to. So they, in essence, were getting a piece of art for them. So I'm just going to show this to you real quickly.
This the adenoid here. I'm a useless gland in the back of Charlie's throat. Charlie's doing a little Kickstarter program, and he asked me to help him out. Goddamn good idea. So anyway, there are a lot of rewards here. One of them might be just the one for you. Meaning, it's for the trash, goddammit, it's all crap. It doesn't matter, but go to it. You might find something. Okay, ciao.
So these went to
This the adenoid here.
So these went to different people. Once I actually got the campaign going, every week I'd make a new video. So we went down to Colombia, and when we were on the savannah of Colombia, I actually made another video. And then I would post it on Instagram and Facebook.
Hi, my name is Charley Friedman. I'm making an immersive sound environment through Kickstarter. I need your support. We've almost reached our funding, but we still need more. You can see through the liquidometer what we have and how much more we need. You can see we've almost reached our goal, but we still need your support. Thank you very much. Hi.
And here's the last one I made.
Hi, my name is Betsy Depp, and I represent the artist Charley Friedman. Charley is doing an iconic Kickstarter program, and he needs your support. This is the final weekend, and I'm here with two other aspects of Charley Friedman, the adenoid and the talisman. Please say hello, guys. This is the adenoid here. Who needs Kickstarter? We got other ways of getting money. Hi! I'm the Talisman! This is the final weekend for you to be a part of this iconic piece of American art. So we thank you for your support.
So through this campaign, I was able to get my entire budget. And then I made this piece, which is completely different from the campaign, but the campaign is interesting because I wanted to engage all the performative elements of what I do to interact with people. So Soundtracks for the Present Future deals with many of the aspects I was talking about, the themes that are present in my work. Authenticity, community, how things enter into the body. And sound, I had never thought about as a socialized system. But sound is one of those things that we actually, on one level, individually, we can be listening to a piece of music with our headphones on, and it's speaking to us. But on the other hand, we can be at a rock concert, and we can all be going like this or going like this, and we're all in unison together. We can be in a church and be doing the same thing. Or we can even be at some kind of a community center. Music has that interesting thing where it can be about the individual and the community. So I wanted to make a piece that made an arc between both aspects of it. So I got 60 guitars, and each guitar played one note in the octave scale that correlated to a MIDI keyboard. And you would pass through. The piece was completely or nonlinear. So you would enter when you wanted, you would stay for as long as you wanted, and you would leave. And while you were there, you would have this very personal experience with the sound. Unlike some pieces, even though sound and music can be to create kind of a disunity, I wanted to create a unity with the piece. So you would pass through it, and sometimes you'd be there with other people, and you'd brusque past people. You wouldn't engage in conversation, but you would know that the other person was there also having their own experience. And once again, through many of the pieces, I'm not hiding anything from you. I'm showing all the motors, all the clips, all the wires, because I want the illusion, the transference to happen in your imagination, in your head. Here's the little, I imagine the piece, a lot of people think that sculptures and artwork are these things that actually, once they're done, don't need to be modified. But I was treating this piece like a 1968 Beetle. So I had a little center here where I could have extra strings, screws, and whatnot, tape, to always kind of tweak the piece a little bit. Here is the brains of the piece. I got 7 different composers to create unique compositions for the piece. And in that way, once again, I'm taking it out of the realm of me, the solitary artist, and I'm saying, no, this is actually a collaborative thing. This involves the community, because I'm not a musician. So what I did is each one of the composers, I gave key to my studio, and I'd say, hey, and I gave them a loose kind of a rubric of what I kind of wanted to get out of the piece. And I'd say, here are the keys to my studio. Here's a fridge. There's coffee, there's tea, there's beer. You go have fun. This is going to have your name on it. And then I made a playlist, and I combined it all together, and I play it through the control center of this computer. And I believe here is a video. And each composer really brought a different energy to the piece. And let's see, here's a different. This composer, he's a writer of sacred music in a monastery right outside of Denton, Nebraska. So some of the composers had like a traditional classical background, others had more of a punk rock background, and this guy wrote sacred music. So within this piece that you could engage with on an individual level, I also realized that there was the potential to have recitals. So I invited, in this case, the pianist Paul Barnes to have a recital at the Bemis Center. And I made, on the MIDI, where you can control the whole piece, as you can see, I made a little candelabra for him and a place to put his music. And we set up a whole 2 nights of actually having a traditional audience interact with this. But unlike a traditional proscenium recital, where you, the audience, are there and then the musicians are here, I had Paul in the center and everybody was around the perimeter of the piece. And we went that way. So that's the last piece I'm going to show you today. Thank you very much. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer anything. Anybody? Yes.
Why, for your one work, did you choose a puppet for the Talisman man?
It's a great question.
It's very interesting.
I wanted to use something that everybody wouldn't be off-put by. You know, no one's off-put by a Muppet. So, you know, Muppets are friendly. They remind us of Sesame Street. They're benign. They're childlike. So, if a puppet greets you on the street and very earnestly asks you questions, at some point, that engagement, once again, that you can get that engagement. And it's that engagement that I'm really looking for. What's going to connect me or the puppet to you? And what's going to open up you? So once you're open up, then you're like putty. And then you can be manipulated. Although it's up to me to not abuse that power, if that makes sense. I never want to abuse that power, but I am thinking about that power dynamic, that power relationship. So that's why I chose the puppet. The second reason why I chose the puppet is I wanted something where the brain would be in a place where my brain wasn't. You know, you're actually talking to my hand, but you're fully allowing your imagination, your logic to enter into that relationship, which is not so different from the nipple eyes. You're deciding to look at those eyes as though they're the real thing, you know, and you're trying to separate them. But once again, it's that distinction between what you know and what you feel. So those things I'm always playing with. Good question. Anybody else?
Are your guitars still up?
No. Well, they're up in my studio right now. So they're actually going to go on tour. So they're going to go to the Everson Museum in Syracuse, New York in January. And then they're going to go to some other places. We just have to get the dotted line signed. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah.